Namaste, my beautiful co-creators. This is Isolde Kellerman, and welcome to Journey of Awe. We're an interactive TV where we bring you the latest teachings, education to illuminate the collective consciousness. I have a very special guest for you today, Dr. Nagel, a very dear friend of mine who is the founder of the Quality Life Institute. And also, he is in a pre-launch state to launch his new book, which is called the Estrogen, the Girl's Best Friend. I remember, James, when we started to name your book, and welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing very well, Isolde. Thank you for having me.
It's a true pleasure to talk about this new event, because you've been working on this book for how long?
Oh, it's been in the writing process probably 4 or 5 years. And go ahead.
Sorry about that. So tell me, how did you start it? I mean, your background is Western medicine, yes?
Yes, I'm a classically trained physician, and I did my fellowship and residency in internal medicine, which gave me a lot of training and competency in the area of hospital-based care. So I was trained in acute care medicine, and you can imagine my sort of culture shock experience when my patients in the clinic would come to me with complaints like, "Doctor, my hair is thinning," or "I'm starting to get dry, itchy skin," or "I just don't have the energy that I used to have." And this was a lot different than the type of experience that I had been trained in med school and residency, where patients get admitted to the hospital only if they're going to die of some acute illness. So there was a lot of interactive learning that I had to do with my patients, and fortunately my patients were patient with me and didn't kick me out. But, it's interesting that over the years I learned a lot about estrogen and have come to realize that estrogen is not a health hazard to women, contrary to sort of popular belief and what is being promoted by mainstream media. In reality,
so if I could just stop there just for a second. You came from a medical background. Your parents were in the medical field as well, yes?
Yeah, my father was a medical missionary for about 25 years. He was a physician in the military as well for about 5.5 years during World War II, and was trained as a surgeon and an OB/GYN specialist. And I had my first experiences with medicine as a kid growing up, watching my father do surgery and rounding with him in the hospital. It was quite an honor and an opportunity for me to get exposed to medicine that way.
Well, I met him. He is a wonderful human being. He's really knowledgeable, and also he's very proud of his accomplishments in the medical field, and he was teaching as well after a while, isn't it, in the United States?
Yes, my father had a lot of experience not only as a mission hospital physician, but in the military, and then had an opportunity to enrich his teaching to medical students and nursing students for about 27 years at Pacific Union College. And certainly my father's rich medical background added a lot to the educational information he was able to transmit to the students. And it was definitely an honor for me to be able to be raised under that type of influence and to be exposed to the concepts of medicine, but also the concepts of preventive medicine, nutrition, and lifestyle medicine, which was very much a part of our life as we grew up.
Yes, prevention is the best medicine. So when you went through the medical schooling and your practice, So you've seen that there is something lacking in the education, because it's Western medicine is pretty cookie cutter, so it needs to fit the box. Otherwise, we don't know where to go. So what inspired you to look beyond what you've been taught?
Well, like I said, patients would come to me with complaints that I didn't really have good answers for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was more of an accidental thing that I started attending educational programs and conferences that were teaching lifestyle medicine, integrative and holistic medicine, and functional medicine. And this gave me a background in nutrition, gave me a background in endocrinology and hormone replacement that began to give me useful tools, more tools than I had when I graduated from med school, to start actually addressing the real problems that people had with solutions that were more compatible with what they wanted. Most of my patients that come to see me tell me, Dr. Nagel, we don't want your drugs. We want more of a holistic approach to solving our health problems. And my patients, believe it or not, are usually proactive. They take personal responsibility for their health.
Mm-hmm.
And this makes it much easier to then get to the root cause of the problem and literally get the results that we're looking for. And my book, one of the things that inspired me to write the book in the first place was the fact that patients would come into my practice in follow-up and they would tell me phenomenal stories of response to estrogen restoration therapy that I hadn't dreamed was possible. And as this began to occur on a daily basis, I would document their stories, and over time I felt that these women needed a platform to be able to share their personal experience with estrogen restoration and how it transformed their lives. And that's what really inspired me to start writing this book in the first place, was listening to the stories on a daily basis of women's lives who had been transformed and who had really gotten their life back.
Yes. So what really, what I know about hormones is from you, and also the typical Western medicine idea. And we talked about this, estrogen has a pretty bad rap in a sense. And what you came to find out is the total opposite. It's almost like the fountain of youth, isn't it?
Well, hormones are what promote healing and repair in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And what has been implied by the stories in the news media and a lot of sort of policies that have been put into place in the medical field is that hormones like testosterone or estrogen in women is somehow a health hazard to women. And we literally have become very afraid of estrogen, especially, and there is a culture of fear that surrounds the use of estrogen. And so we're advised to use the lowest dose for the shortest duration of time, and only in women with the worst of symptoms. And this just doesn't make sense, given the fact that when estrogen is at optimal levels, when a woman is young, she is in her best state of health. She has the most amount of energy. She has the least amount of disease. And, you know, fortunately, research scientists and clinical practitioners all around the globe are telling a different story. And the story is that estrogen is the saving grace of women at every stage of a woman's life. And, you know, the benefits to a woman's body are almost limitless. Turns out that estrogen makes almost everything happen in a woman's body.
Wow.
There isn't anything that happens in a woman's body that isn't somehow under the regulation and control of estrogen. In fact, the need for estrogen has been woven thread by thread through the molecular and genetic fabric of every woman's being. And without estrogen, her body becomes a landscape of disease and frailty, devoid of feminine beauty, health, vitality, and the ability to enter into emotional connections with others. And that's a huge part of it. In fact, I've had so many patients tell me that I need to get into the relationship business.
I like that.
I don't know anything about relationships when it comes to the dynamic of a relationship, but I do know that when couples become hormonally and nutritionally sound, that their dysfunctional relationships get back on track.
It becomes functional again.
They get on the same page again with respect to love and romance and need for sexual intimacy and that sort of thing. So it has been a very interesting journey for me. I've learned so much from my patients, and we continue to learn. There's so much more to tell.
Yeah, so the question what I have is that when you look at that, you talked about there is two types of treatments for estrogen, and one is that pretty much the Western medicine uses in birth controls and patches, which is designed in a low dose and it's for everyone. But the problem comes with that every body is unique, yes?
Yes.
So giving them that low dose, small amount, and patches every stage, every day of the month is really confusing for the body. Or is it not, it doesn't give the right reading when it's needed. So can you tell me how is your treatment is different from that treatment?
Okay, well, there are some very good medications and prescriptions that you can get at the regular pharmacy. They are natural to a woman's body. We refer to them as bioidentical. The problem with the conventional medical approach is that nobody is trying to tailor make this to every individual. In other words, there's no system to customize the therapy to make it and dial it in to perfection for the patient. So if the dosage isn't right for the patient, she's not going to feel good. She's not going to get the full benefits that estrogen was intended to provide her body. Now, the trend in medicine today has been for symptom relief. So symptom management is kind of the approach, and if you have a patient come in complaining of hot flashes, well, you could give them a prescription for a patch or a pill or a gel, and none of those are bad things, but it might help their hot flashes, but it isn't going to prevent them from developing Alzheimer's disease or diabetes or heart disease, osteoporosis, or dementia down the road. So what you need to do is to be able to restore a woman's physiology back toward optimal, what she had when her body was fully operational and she was in her best state of health. Anything less than that is going to minimize the beneficial effect of estrogen on a woman's body.
I see.
So, yeah, when you look at what estrogen deficiency does to a woman's body, it's quite frightening. In fact, there are some authorities that refer to women in a state of menopause as women in a state of castration.
Wow.
No man would put up with being castrated. He would want his testosterone replaced, and he would want it to be replaced toward optimal. Same thing with women. When you restore their estrogen back toward optimal, they experience all of the health benefits that they had when their estrogen was optimal in their youth, and they will be protected from a lot of the different degenerative diseases of aging. So if you look at a woman who's in a state of estrogen deficiency, what happens to her body? If you're looking at a woman's brain, well, if a woman's brain is estrogen deficient, she experiences brain fog. That's the common description of what they experience, brain fog. Difficulty concentrating, difficulty getting focused. Oftentimes they'll experience hot flashes, night sweats, anxiety, insomnia. Depression is a huge symptom of estrogen deficiency. And it doesn't matter if you're in menopause or if you're a teenager with ovaries that are suboptimal and producing estrogen at low levels, you're going to feel depressed, moody, irritable, have all the signs of PMS. And ultimately, if a woman is in a state of estrogen deficiency for a long enough period of time, her brain becomes at risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and other neurodegenerative diseases. And of course, women don't have a libido when they're estrogen deficient. So this has a very negative impact on relationships.
Yes.
Still has a libido. So if you're a woman's endocrine function, what happens if you're in a state of estrogen deficiency? Well, women experience more allergies, asthma, eczema, psoriasis, all these autoimmune problems. And the peak onset, we know the peak onset for autoimmunity is between the 3rd, 4th, and 5th decades of a woman's life. And this is when women experience thyroid disorders, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, many of the classic autoimmune diseases. There's at least 91 of them. There's a lot of different autoimmune diseases that women experience, and they almost always experience it in the setting of estrogen deficiency. Now, what happens if your woman's cardiovascular system, which is very, very interesting to me, because women generally are protected from cardiovascular disease until menopause. And then once they become estrogen deficient, they then are at risk of developing cardiovascular disease. It turns out that 10 years after menopause, women equilibrate with men, and eventually more women die of heart disease than men. And they've been collecting data on that for a long time, and ever since 1984, more women have died of heart disease than guys. So if you're looking at her cardiovascular system, it turns out that she's at greater risk of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes, insulin resistance, obesity, which is a huge risk factor of cardiovascular disease. It turns out that in every cell of the cardiovascular system, there are functional estrogen receptors attached to every part of that. So if you look at the pacemaker cells in the heart, they have functional estrogen receptors. The muscle cells in the heart, the conduction cells of the heart, the endothelial cells that line every artery of the cardiovascular system have functional estrogen receptors. And then you look on the surface of the cell, within the cytoplasm of the cell, on the surface of the mitochondria, within the mitochondria, on the surface of the DNA of the nucleus of the cell. There are functional estrogen receptors throughout the entire cardiovascular system, and estrogen regulates every facet of the cardiovascular system and keeps our heart and circulation healthy until she becomes estrogen deficient. And
So,
it's only after she becomes estrogen deficient that she develops any problems with her cardiovascular system.
so what you're telling me is that when the estrogen is diminished from the body gets the signal that it's ready to die, and eventually it just falls apart.
Basically, that's one way of saying it. There's a death signal that's propagated throughout a woman's body that heralds the beginning of a downward spiral of deterioration and death. No
Wow.
question about it. And it's because of a loss of regulation of anabolism, or the healing and repair functions that estrogen promotes. So estrogen promotes healing of your bones, of your joints, of your muscles, of your immune system, cardiovascular system, nervous system, your reproductive system. If a woman is in a state of reproductive deficiency or estrogen deficiency, her reproductive system will not be healthy. She'll develop vaginal dryness and atrophy of the vagina and urogenital system. She'll have heavy menstrual periods. She may be at risk for endometriosis. Endometriosis is due to estrogen deficiency. End of story. There's no other cause for it. And yet somehow the OBGYN specialists haven't figured that out. So if you restore a woman's estrogen back toward optimal, her endometriosis goes away. Her interstitial cystitis goes away. There's ongoing research today that is linking gallbladder disease, endometriosis, and interstitial cystitis with low estrogen.
Wow.
So if you kept a woman's estrogen levels optimal throughout her entire reproductive system, either through lifestyle and nutrition, or if you have to restore them with optimal bioidentical hormone restoration, you can prevent all of these different degenerative diseases of aging, all of these different OBGYN complications of estrogen deficiency. And it's a simple solution, but it isn't one that's being utilized, and I think that's unfortunate.
So when a patient comes to see you, you approach this topic very differently because you listen to the symptoms, but also you do a blood test, isn't it, to see where the patient estrogen and other hormone levels are.
The most important test, believe it or not, is the story the patient is telling you.
Wow. Okay.
But I do assess blood levels of estrogen or estradiol, FSH, testosterone levels, sex hormone binding globulin, thyroid, vitamin D levels are very important. And sometimes IGF-1, which is a surrogate marker of human growth hormone. I look at those because those tell me a lot about the state of estrogen in a woman's body. But it isn't necessarily diagnostic. What is more diagnostic is the story the patient is telling me themselves. But we do the blood tests to get the information to see if there is a clinical correlation between her story and her blood levels. And usually there is. Interestingly enough, there is a very powerful direct correlation between a woman's blood levels and how she feels. And so that is very useful information. I get their baseline, and then from there we implement a therapeutic lifestyle intervention which helps them get on the same page with our recommendations for diet, lifestyle. It's very important your diet be good, otherwise your body will not process the hormones well, because our body is designed, a woman's body is designed to metabolize and eliminate the hormones as rapidly as she makes them.
So what is the biggest enemy in our food for estrogen?
Well, sugar is probably the biggest, but processed and refined foods are devoid of any nutritional value. They're devoid of fiber. They're devoid of the minerals and vitamins that aid the liver in the detoxification process and aid the intestinal tract in better elimination of toxins. So if your diet and lifestyle is the typical American diet, you're not going to handle these hormones well. So we make sure patients get on the same page with what's best for their body nutritionally, and then they're much more likely, once they've gone through a detoxification process, of being able to handle the estrogen and the progesterone the way the body was supposed to handle it. And this enables the body to listen to the messages that estrogen was intended to communicate. And the blood levels are very telling as to what message gets spoken, and what tissues of the body will listen to certain messages. So the messages are very specific, and it's important that these messages be communicated clearly. And these messages change depending on the level of estrogen in the body. So at one point in time where the estrogen is around 250, the message will be completely different than if the estrogen is 500. So we restore women's hormones back to them in a rhythmic hormone restoration protocol that replicates the normal rhythm that a woman had when she was young, healthy, and reproductive.
So if we can go back to sugar, if you could tell me on the kitchen language, what happens when I eat sugar to my estrogen? Do I wipe it out?
Well, it turns out that a woman's worst enemy is sugar. And sugar inhibits the ovarian production of hormones, as it does in actually downregulating the production of estrogen in the brain. Not estrogen, but serotonin in the brain and other neurotransmitters. So estrogen behaves as a depressant and ultimately as an endocrine disruptor, and inhibits estrogen production by the ovaries. It does that in guys too. So guys oftentimes try to fool their physician to get them to prescribe testosterone, and they eat a diet very high in sugar and carbohydrates, and it inhibits testicular production of testosterone. Same thing with the ovaries.
So it works the same for men and women. When you eat sugar.
Yes. And of course, there's at least 200 different health problems that you start to develop when your estrogen goes low. And this ends up making women feel bad, low energy, fatigued, bleeding problems, pain problems with their periods, chronic pain syndromes like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. Most of these are directly related to estrogen production. And if your diet is poor, with poor nutrition and lots of sugar, you're literally poisoning the ability of the ovaries to produce estrogen at optimal levels.
Wow, that's amazing. One more thing. When we talked about estrogen, it had a bad rep because they said that it's cancer causing. So what is the truth behind estrogen, or the connection between estrogen and cancer?
You know, Isolde, that's an extremely important point, because I've been reading the literature that goes back over 100 years. And there have been advocates of ovarian secretion replacement to estrogen restoration once estrogen was discovered. And there have been individuals who have suggested from the beginning of time that we've been debating this whole estrogen issue, that estrogen somehow is a health hazard to women and causes breast cancer. So there's been this debate between these two schools of thought. at least for the last 100 years, if not more. And so there have been individuals who have been very passionate about promoting estrogen, and there have been individuals very passionate about suggesting that estrogen causes cancer. Now, if you review the literature over the past 100 years, there's not a shred of evidence that estrogen is linked to causing cancer. In other words, we cannot demonstrate through any studies that estrogen is carcinogenic. So, again, where do we get this idea that estrogen somehow causes breast cancer? Well, it doesn't cause breast cancer, but if you happen to develop it,
yes,
then many of the breast cancers are estrogen receptor positive, and the oncologists will tell their patients that their breast cancer is linked to estrogen, which is, I think, misinformation. It's not causative, but they do everything in their power to lower a woman's estrogen and deprive her of it. So they'll give her estrogen blockers. They'll give them Arimidex, which is a drug that blocks the conversion of testosterone into estrogen. They want to starve the cancer as much as possible of any estrogen stimulation, thinking that somehow that they're doing the patient good. And it turns out making the patient feel terrible, and the quality of their life is very poor because now a woman is trying to survive in a state of extremely low estrogen. Now, as I said earlier, there's never been a study that links estrogen as the cause of breast cancer. In fact, 40 to 50 years ago, it was standard of care to treat women with breast cancer with high-dose estrogen.
And what was the success rate of that?
About 30 to 40% of women had a very good response. And they did not stop doing that until drugs like tamoxifen came along and were demonstrated to perhaps be safer, more efficacious, etc. But it was the standard of care to use high-dose estrogen in the treatment of breast cancer. Now, there's a lot of literature today going on, research that suggests that 17-beta estradiol, which is the main estrogen that women produce, has a beneficial effect in breast cancer. For example, there is a drug that has been approved by the FDA called Panzem, and it's a metabolite of 17-beta estradiol. And it's 2-methoxyestradiol, the name of that drug. And this drug has been shown beneficial in treating sarcoma, brain, and lung cancer. And it turns out that this particular estrogen metabolite induces apoptosis, inhibits growth, and is anti-angiogenic. In other words, it can block the formation of blood vessels that feed the cancer.
That's amazing.
But the authors of the study that demonstrated that this estrogen metabolite was beneficial at treating cancers and has FDA approval for treating brain, sarcoma, and lung cancer, is also effective against breast cancer and especially the metastasis of breast cancer. So now the authors of the study said, interestingly enough, 17-beta estradiol at high levels does the same thing. It induces apoptosis, inhibition of growth, and is anti-angiogenic, which is what we're trying to accomplish in the treatment of cancer in the first place.
Yes. So
In addition to that, there was a study that came out of Italy that showed that 17-beta estradiol is the only substance that we know of that will induce apoptosis of the breast cancer stem cells. So we now believe and recognize that cancers are derived from stem cells, which is a whole new concept, because in the past we used to think that a normal breast cell underwent dedifferentiation and eventually became cancerous. But in reality, it is derived from breast cancer stem cells, and it is 17-beta estradiol that is the only substance we know of that induces breast cancer stem cell apoptosis, which is a way of saying programmed cell death.
Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, go ahead.
So in your book, going back into your book, what could we use naturally to make to produce estrogen in the body? You know, you relate to women or modern men and women as modern cave people because we're inside too much and we are disconnected from nature. So is that the cause of, beside the diet, what we eat, that we are our estrogen or hormone level is low?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons that a woman will develop ovarian failure. Mm-hmm. And that level of ovarian failure is either relative or absolute. So, you know, when a woman goes into menopause around age 50, 51, mm-hmm. on the average, women can go into menopause at any age before then, sometimes after that. But when a woman goes into menopause, she goes into menopause because her ovaries are now out of eggs. And it's the egg, the follicle, and the theca cells that surround the follicle that produce the estrogen. So no eggs, no theca cells, no estrogen. So you have an absolute estrogen deficiency at that point in time. But you can be a teenager in your 20s, 30s, and 40s still producing estrogen, but producing it at a suboptimal level. Mm-hmm. When you produce it at a suboptimal level, you have all the symptoms that we described in terms of depression, anxiety, obesity, insulin resistance, risk of diabetes, heart disease, etc., etc. Now, a lot of things interfere with a woman's ability to produce estrogen. The number one factor is the standard American diet. Mm-hmm. It is so nutritionally depleted and high in sugar that it doesn't supply the horsepower that the ovaries require to produce estrogen. The other thing is that we live in an exercise deficiency environment. Mm-hmm. The main purpose of exercise is not to burn calories, but to pump blood through the endocrine system and the ovaries so they can work to bring nutrition to the ovaries and then carry the hormones throughout the body. And when a woman exercises on a regular basis, she is then providing the ovaries the optimal environment for being able to disseminate estrogen throughout her body, and her reproductive system, her sexuality, her beauty, all of these things are enhanced. Mm-hmm. Now, it turns out that there are vitamin D receptors very strategically placed on the ovaries and the testicles. So when a woman lives indoors, we, modern man being the true caveman, because we're indoors, isolated from the energetic connection of the planet mm-hmm. and the sun, we don't get the stimulation to produce estrogen. Now, they've done studies that show that women with the highest levels of estrogen were rated as more attractive and healthy than women with low levels of estrogen. Mm-hmm. So this could explain why the poets and the songwriters and the singers sing about California girls. Right? They're literally singing about Probably not Chico girls, but girls down in Laguna Beach and Venice Beach and Southern California girls that are getting lots of sun exposure, and they're doing a lot of exercise and fun in the sun. The more sun a woman gets, the more exercise she gets in the sun, the higher her estrogen levels, and therefore the more health benefits that will be transmitted to that woman. They've done studies on guys down there in Venice Beach that are working out in the sun on the beach all day long. And the normal blood level for a young, healthy male is between 600 and 800. These guys will demonstrate blood levels of testosterone as high as 1,800 and 2,400.
Wow.
And I've done blood levels on patients myself that spent a lot of time in the sun, and their blood levels of testosterone were off the charts, literally. I had one.
James, this is James from the Community Action.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I had one patient who had a job that required them to be outdoors 6 to 8 hours a day, maybe 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. And he was in his mid-40s. And he said, I'm just curious, I'd like to check my testosterone levels. So he came in and got his testosterone levels checked. His testosterone was over 1,400. And he was not taking any form of testosterone or testosterone stimulation. It was all the effects of sunshine on his body.
So if you want a good sex life, guys, you need to be barefoot and sunshine, and your testosterone level will rise.
You know, that's the reality. To be barefoot and fancy-free and spending time in the sun is what our Paleolithic ancestors did, and it promoted seasonal variation in their testosterone levels and estrogen levels, which affected their not only their libido, but their fertility. So it's better to be fertile and to be reproductive during the time of the year when there's lots of carbohydrate-based foods available, like fruits and vegetables, and of course, protein, in order to sustain a healthy pregnancy. So seasonally, we are very much affected by the sun. So during the winter, when the days are short and the nights are long, both a man and a woman's hormone levels will decline significantly. And then when they get back into the spring and summer, their hormone levels, especially if they spend time outdoors, tend to skyrocket relative to what they were, and their fertility rate goes much higher.
So that's the spring fever, huh?
It's the spring fever, exactly. They're coming out of hibernation, they're going into the sun, having fun. Next thing you know, their hormones have skyrocketed, and they're much more interested in procreation.
In procreation, so the sunshine procreate. That's amazing. That scientifically explains why there's more pregnancy happens in the springtime. Yes.
Yes, precisely.
Oh, that is fascinating. So when is your book coming out, Dr. Nagel?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I would estimate probably in the next 3 months.
That is fascinating. And I remember when we were trying to name your book, Estrogen, the Girl's Best Friend. And I think it's you know, that title explains it beautifully, because it is our best friend. Without estrogen, our body is deteriorating, and without it, it's like without the fountain of youth.
Yeah.
We cannot exist.
There's no question that none of us would exist without estrogen. Estrogen wouldn't exist. Relationships wouldn't exist without estrogen. Procreation wouldn't exist without estrogen. And women do much better from a health standpoint in an estrogen-rich environment. And that's what I'm trying to educate people about, and physicians alike, that we need not be afraid of estrogen, that estrogen is safe for women, And the only condition where estrogen isn't safe is when you're in an estrogen deficient environment. And that is what causes health problems for women.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for your time and for your knowledge. It was extremely beneficial for me because I had the honor to read a couple of chapters of your book. But this gives me a better idea, and also for our viewers, that these hormones are there naturally in our body and there to support us to keep our body in our full potential. And without it, it gives us the death signal, which is the body deteriorates. And one more question, that as you chose a different path in the medical field, which is different from Western medicine, do you find blockages or do you find difficult to practice what you do, because Western medicine is so different, what you're saying?
Well, I have had a lot of criticism from other physicians in the community.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like what I do, and that has not been easy to deal with. But I think as information gets disseminated, as more people understand the truth about hormone replacement therapy and how important it is for the health of the individual, I think there is a growing acceptance of what it is that we do. And I'm not alone in doing this. There are thousands of other physicians that have been trained to do what it is I do. And women are spreading the message. Your best advertisement is a happy customer, and women that are happy share that information with their girlfriends. Mm-hmm. And so we're busy, and I appreciate the privilege and the honor to take care of people, and I appreciate their trust in me. And the beauty is that we get very good results. We turn people's lives around. Relationships oftentimes get mended, and women are happy. And that's what it's all about, making people healthy and happy at the same time. Exactly.
That is the words of a true healer. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Nagel, and I know you have to go back to your patients, and thank you. Namaste.
Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.